Hey, it's David. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the different eras of Lionel and what I think is Lionel's best era. This video will include the post-war era, the MPC era, as well as the modern era. Now, I'm not going to be able to talk about the pre-war era at all because I don't have any Lionel pre-war stuff, so I won't really be able to discuss that when talking about my favorite eras. But the Lionel pre-war era does have tons of very iconic and awesome stuff. I just don't have anything to represent it today. Anyways, let's get started by talking about the Lionel post-war era. So the Lionel post-war era is Lionel trains produced from 1945, so after World War II, to 1969 with the sale of the Lionel Corporation to General Mills. The post-war era is one of the most iconic Lionel eras there is because of stuff like the 736 Berkshire, the Turbine, the Santa Fe F3s, GG1s, and so much other great stuff. Because of this, it's one of the most highly collectible eras as well, and it really shows Lionel during its golden age, I would say. Let's talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons of collecting Lionel post-war era trains. So some of the pros of the Lionel post-war era include, again, that collectability and just kind of iconography of the era. With there being so much great stuff produced, there are people who focus their entire collecting efforts on just collecting Lionel post-war, and because of that, there's a ton of great documentation out there about it. There's books, websites, articles. I mean, I would say that the Lionel post-war era is probably one of the most well-documented and represented era of Lionel collecting. And because of this, as a collector, it's one of the most fun eras to get into because there is just so much to uncover and kind of explore and to research and stuff, whether it be variations of things or rare stuff or basically anything. The Lionel post-war era kind of has it all. So if you're looking at Lionel from a collecting standpoint, the post-war era is one of the best. The other thing about the post-war era is it has a great nostalgia factor. I know for me personally, the Lionel post-war era is very nostalgic for me because my grandfather had some Lionel post-war trains. In fact, those blue Alcos in the back there, those were my grandfather's. So like flipping through old Lionel catalogs and buying old Lionel post-war trains has a really awesome nostalgia factor that kind of just harkens back to kind of a different era of our country, the 1950s and 60s and stuff. So that holds a lot of value to a lot of people. Another great thing about Lionel post-war is that they have a really certain kind of specific quality to them, where they're solid, they're heavy, they're very well made, and they're also really easy to work on. They're very simple. They've got, a motor unit, smoke unit, maybe whistle, but it's all basic components. It's all mechanical. There's nothing like electronic boards or circuits or anything like that you really have to worry about. Anyone with basic repair knowledge of such can really fix them. They can get into them and stuff. There's not a lot going on. I mean, for me personally, Lionel post-war trains are one of the easiest things to kind of start getting into fixing them. That's how I started, was fixing up some of my grandpa's trains, and there's not a ton to them, so you don't really have to worry when buying Lionel post-war trains. Like me personally, I don't even have to look for trains that work because I know that I can buy a Lionel post-war train, and if it doesn't work, it really doesn't take a whole lot to get them running again. Now, this brings me to my next point, which is some of the cons of the Lionel post-war trains, which there isn't a whole lot, but since these trains are older, I mean, they're going to be 67 years old, the trains you're buying, they're not going to always be in the best condition. You're going to find ones with scratch paint, a little bit of surface rust, chips such as that, and ones that are in nice shape are really going to charge a premium due to that collectability. And again, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of work on them to get them running nice again, since they're so old. A lot of these have sat for a long time, or if they have been used, they'll be worn out by now. So there might be a little bit of work that goes into getting these trains running, but like I said before, that's really not too difficult. It's just something to keep in mind when buying these older trains. Another con of Lionel post-war trains is that there's really not as much variety compared to the other Lionel eras. A lot of these products were made for many years, such as the 736 I have right here, for example. That engine was produced from 1951 all the way until the end of Lionel post-war trains in the late 60s. You don't really see that with some of the newer stuff because they kind of go on shorter production runs, and therefore you don't really get as much turnover of product. You're going to see stuff that appears over and over again, so you're not going to see as many different road names, you're not going to see as many different paint schemes and such. Not to say that there aren't. For example, the Lionel post-war diesels and boxcars and such, tons of different colors and road names there, but these steam engines, if you take a look, they all kind of look very similar in terms of paint, and there's only really two road names represented here, which you can't see the tenders, but you've got Lionel lines and you've got Pennsylvania. And that's kind of a common theme for Lionel post-war steam engines. I guess if there was any criticism of Lionel post-war, it would be that a lot of the stuff is kind of similar. But for me, that doesn't bother me because I know that I can see the differences and stuff. But for a novice or an average person and stuff, they might not be able to see the difference between a 736 or a 726 or a 2046. They might all look very similar to them, and that might kind of drive them away from Lionel post-war trains because there isn't as much variety there as many of the other Lionel eras. And the last kind of final con of the Lionel post-war era, if you consider that, is that these are toy trains. These aren't going to be realistic. For example, the Lionel lines, that's not a real railroad, but it's represented on a lot of Lionel stuff. And there's going to be like silly operating cars and accessories. Stuff is oversized, undersized. It's not scale. It's not model trains. They're toys. And for me, that's not a con. That's actually a pro of it. I enjoy that. But for a lot of people, they don't enjoy that, and they don't want to collect toy trains. They want to collect model trains. So that's another reason I think some people might stay away from the post-war era, is because it's not as realistic or prototypical as other Lionel eras. But, like, again, for me, that's not a con, and for many people, they actually enjoy that kind of whimsical nature of post-war, but for some, they don't enjoy it. Overall, though, the Lionel Post War Era is one which is filled with iconic product, has lots of appealing factors to many people, and therefore is one of the most popular to collect. Next Lionel era we're going to talk about is the Lionel MPC era. The MPC era would last from 1970 with the purchase of the Lionel product line by General Mills until 1986 with the purchase of Lionel by Richard Kuhn. Out of all the Lionel eras, I would say that the MPC era probably receives the least attention from Lionel fans out of all the eras, although we are seeing this change in recent years. The Lionel MPC era is characterized by the large expansion of the Lionel product line through lots of new locomotives, rolling stock, and features and such, as well as the addition of a large number of railroads and paint schemes to the line. The period also shows a shifting dynamic for Lionel, as by the late 70s they were no longer just marketing sets towards children, but also marketing towards a growing number of Lionel collectors. Let's talk about some of the pros of collecting Lionel MPC era trains. The pro to collecting MPC era trains is the diverse number of railroads and paint schemes represented by the line. In this period you saw lots of those classic post-war engines such as the F3s, the Berkshires, and the GP9s, but they were now done up in tons of new paint schemes never seen before for Lionel. The MPC era also showed lots more real railroads, as well as more realistic paint schemes, as well as modern stuff such as the Burlington Northern and Penn Central. For me, this is one of the great aspects of the Lionel MPC era, is that you get a lot of that stuff that's similar to that post-war stuff, albeit slightly lower quality for cost-cutting measures, but you now have lots of real railroad road names and real paint schemes, and just it feels refreshing to see lots of new stuff represented during the Lionel MPC era. Another great thing about the Lionel MPC era is that it's probably the most affordable Lionel era there is. Again, it's probably the least sought after, so stuff you're going to find is going to be for a great price. For example, that Lionel 75th anniversary U-boat I found back there, I got that on eBay for under $50, which for an engine is just an extraordinary price. And again, for most of this stuff, I got a pretty good deal on it. That Ontario Northland SD18 right there, I got for $75, which I think is a great deal. So you're going to find Lionel NPC era stuff for pretty cheap, and there's a ton of availability of it too. So Lionel NPC era is very easy to collect and to get into because of the affordability. And another reason it's so easy to get into is that, like the post-war engines, they're very easy to work on, they're very easy to repair. So it's not hard to collect Lionel NPC era trains. Just like post-war, all you really need is a transformer and track. They're easy to fix, and they're very affordable. Now, this doesn't mean that the Lionel NPC era isn't a collectible era. There are tons of Lionel NPC era products that are extremely sought after, such as the Blue Comet set, the Southern Pacific Daylight, F3s, and lots of other great stuff. People buy them very quickly, and they will pay a good bit of money for them, a lot more than what we've seen in the past, because the Lionel NPC era is kind of growing in appreciation because people realize that some of the misconceptions about it, which we'll talk about in a minute, aren't really true, and if you know what to look for, there is a lot of great stuff in the Lionel NPC era. So if you're looking to pick up some good deals, it's actually better to act sooner than later, because as time goes on, more and more people are collecting these trains because they realize that there is quite a lot of value here. And me personally, I've always loved Lionel NPC era trains. My first set was a Lionel NPC era set, but I think that it kind of got a bad reputation for various reasons, which we'll talk about shortly. But overall, I think it's a great Lionel era. Let's talk about some of the cons of the Lionel NPC era. One of the negatives of Lionel NPC era trains is that it kind of has this bad rap for being lower quality and cheaply produced. And this is kind of a misconception that a lot of people kind of believe about the NPC era. So let's talk a little bit about why that is. The big reason for the belief that Lionel NPC era stuff is poorly made and cheap comes down to stuff like this. This is all stuff that would have been pretty common in Lionel NPC era starter sets. Cheap plastic shelled 240s and 242 locomotives like this, as well as cheap and flimsy rolling stock. These rolling stock, they have plastic couplers, only one to sometimes no couplers on each end of the car open. The wheels are made of plastic, and overall they're pretty flimsy and cheap. And this engine is all plastic. There's not really a lot of separately applied parts. The only parts that are metal are the wheels and the drive rods, as well as the motor, stuff like that. But the reason that people believe that the Lionel NPC era was cheaply made stuff is because that they really focused on these starter sets for a long time. From the time that the first Lionel NPC stuff was cataloged in 1970 or so to about the mid-70s, there really wasn't much more than these cheaper starter sets. And so for a while, this was really all you had from Lionel, and so a lot of people seem to associate this kind of quality stuff with the Lionel NPC era as a whole. This kind of focus on these starter sets, as well as the addition to even more economically priced lines, such as the DC-only stuff and some of the really cheap stuff, kind of gives the Lionel NPC era a bad rap when it comes to quality. So I think this really shouldn't be used to judge the NPC line as a whole, but it's part of the reason why people believe that the NPC era stuff is such a low-quality product line. The reason for this belief is that the Lionel NPC Era showed a lot of cost-cutting measures for the company. This included the removal of features such as magnet traction or dual-motor diesel locomotives, as well as the slimming down of details and paint jobs, things to save money because as the 1970s went on, the toy train market was nowhere it used to be during the 1950s with post-war Lionel, and General Mills was trying to keep Lionel afloat without it sinking a ton of money. Now, as the 1970s wore on to the 1980s and the Lionel collector's market slowly began to rise, we saw the Lionel NPC Era produce stuff which is quality akin to its post-war counterparts. So, me personally, I believe that the belief that the NPC Era was all cheap garbage is really nothing that's founded in reality. There is plenty of cheap stuff, as I showed previously, but that's really a misconception, and I think that the Lionel NPC Era has a lot of great quality pieces that were made. It's just you have to know what to look for because there are some issues with certain things. For example, some of the engines and locomotives and rolling stock produced in Mexico for that short period of time suffered from issues. Another example of this being the Southern Crescent Limited Hudson. They had issues with, I believe, the spacing with the gearing and stuff. And so there are certain things to keep in mind when purchasing NPC Era trains, but for the most part, I find the quality to be comparable to post-war era stuff. Although I think the Lionel NPC Era is great and one that has been overlooked by a lot of collectors, but like I said again, we're starting to see this change as people realize that there was a lot of great stuff produced during these years. Alright, the last Lionel era to talk about is going to be the modern era. What exactly the Lionel modern era is really going to be up for interpretation. For me, I consider anything past 1986 or when Lionel was purchased by Richard Kuhn to be the modern era, but it really depends on what you think. Alright, let's start off with some of the pros of collecting Lionel modern trains. First reason that people collect modern Lionel trains is also probably the biggest reason, and it's going to be that these are where you're going to have your most features. Stuff like legacy, vision line, rail sounds, tons of smoke features, all that, it's unique to the modern era because it wasn't even invented beforehand. It's really kind of also a big draw to a lot of people in the hobby. It's very flashy, it's very attractive, and it's very unique to Lionel. Lionel has done a really great job with including tons of new features into their stuff. They're very innovative, I will say, when it comes to that. And so that kind of brings a lot of people to it. It grabs a lot of attention. And it's something that a lot of people enjoy, me included. I really love Lionel Modern Era stuff for all the great features it includes. And that's one of the reasons it's so fun to run is because it's such a lot of stuff going on. It's one thing to set up a train and watch it go around circles all day, but it's totally another thing to be able to control the whole experience with the lights and the sounds and crew talk and doing all sorts of stuff. So that's a big reason that people are drawn to collecting Lionel Modern trains. Another reason that people collect Lionel Modern trains is that this is where you're going to find your nicely detailed scale stuff. A lot of people like to do prototypical modeling, and they like to collect model trains. They don't want to buy toys that are approximations of trains, but they want to buy scale models of the real thing. And I get that being prototypical and being 3.0 scale doesn't really go hand in hand, but still, there is a lot of people in this hobby that enjoy doing that type of thing. And the only place you're going to get that is by collecting Lionel Modern trains. Nowadays, Lionel offers a great line. In fact, most of their catalog is taken up by their scale detailed offerings, which replicate real 1/48 scale models of real trains. It's kind of another one of the big draws of the Lionel Modern era for a lot of people is collecting these big, detailed, O-scale models, because it's something you can't get from any of the other eras. If you want to prototypically model, you're going to have to buy Lionel Modern trains. And so that's another big reason why people like this era. And another pro of this era is one that's kind of a given, but since it's the modern era, it's the era we're currently in, you can buy these trains directly from Lionel. You don't have to source these down on a secondary market and hope that you can find them when you can order them directly from the Lionel catalog and know that you're going to be able to get these things, seeing as they're reached the amount of orders that it takes being made. So that's another reason why people like to buy these trains. They're the ones that are being currently made, and yeah, it's kind of obvious, but it's a big draw for a lot of people. All right, let's talk about some of the negatives of the Lionel Modern era. Now, one of the biggest drawbacks of collecting Lionel Modern trains is going to be the price. Now, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of affordable modern Lionel trains out there. For example, Lionel starter sets, for the most part, are pretty affordable. In fact, 3 of the engines I have on my table right now, other than the Santa Fe engine, they're all engines included in starter sets that were all under $450. So there is plenty of affordable Lionel Modern era trains out there, but a lot of the stuff out there is going to be your legacy stuff. That's going to be really expensive. There's going to be, it's not uncommon to see a Lionel catalog with engines that go $1,000, $2,000, up to almost $3,000. In fact, the past 2 catalogs have each had supersets in them for more than $4,000. That is a ton of money for a model train. And so that's kind of some of the bad rap that the modern era gets. People always complain about the price of stuff. And yeah, you get it, you know, they have to make a profit and all that stuff, but it does get really expensive. You really can't be buying as much Lionel Modern era equipment as you can from other eras simply due to the price of it. Now, this again has to do with a lot of features. The fact that they're not going to be making as many stuff, they're not going to be making as large production runs, so their pricing has to be more expensive to cover the cost of production. They also are going to be the most advanced models in terms of size. They're going to be the biggest. They're also going to have the most features. They're going to be filled with tons of expensive equipment and electronics and such, so they're going to cost a lot to make, and therefore they're going to cost a lot. Plus, it's not uncommon for these engines to be made in small batches, so on the secondary market, if it's a desired piece, they're going to cost a lot of money. For example, that 2004 Polar Express Berkshire, I've seen them go upwards at $6,000. That's a ton of money for a model train. And for one that's not even that old, it's only about 20 years old. I think the high price of a lot of Lionel Modern Era equipment is part of the reason why some people don't collect Lionel Modern Era trains. Another reason that people don't collect Lionel Modern Era trains is that it's not made in the US. I always see people talking about, oh, it's made in China, it's made in Korea, it's made in Vietnam, it's crap, which I personally don't believe. Now, Lionel Modern Era stuff does sometimes have some issues. We've seen a lot of quality control issues come out of Lionel recently. Certain things like paint schemes, paint colors, stuff like that, they can't quite seem to get right. But overall, I think Lionel is still a pretty good quality product. It's, 2024, you're not going to be able to produce trains in the U.S. anymore without having to pay tons of money for them due to the labor cost over here. So I understand why these trains have to be produced overseas, and just the whole process of it means that there's going to be issues. You're going to sometimes get a model that doesn't work perfectly. But Lionel will always work with you to fix this. If you can always send in a model, it'll be covered under your warranty, and they'll send you one back, or they'll fix it for you. So if your Lionel engine does have an issue, it's really not too much to worry about. It can be a bit of an issue. It can be annoying to get a new model and have it not work perfectly. But with everything that it goes through during production and how many big features are in them and stuff, it's really surprising that they get to us in one piece at all. So overall, I think that the Lionel Modern Era, some of the issues with it and stuff, they're understandable, but they're really not too bad. And I think it's a great era for Lionel to collect, and probably one of the most popular too. Alright, now that we've talked about all three Lionel eras, let's talk about what my favorite engine is from each era, and lastly, what my favorite Lionel era is. Alright, so my favorite Lionel Post War engine is going to be my Lionel 736 Berkshire. I've always loved the Berkshire. In real life, it's my favorite kind of steam locomotive, my favorite being nickel plate road 765, and so I love Lionel's Berkshire. This is a great engine. It's heavy, great puller, they run great, got some nice details for a post-war engine, and overall it's just an awesome locomotive. It's a very iconic one for Lionel, almost as iconic as the Hudson, and for that reason, it's my favorite Lionel post-war engine. My favorite Lionel NPC Era locomotive was one I actually had to think about for a minute, but after looking over my collection, I decided it was these, my Canadian Pacific F3s. These are beautiful locomotives. I got these a few years ago, and they look great pulling anything I put behind them. I absolutely love this Canadian Pacific paint scheme. I love the logo on the front, and they look great on a pair of Lionel streamlined-looking F3 units, so this is definitely my favorite NPC Era engine in my collection. Lastly, when it comes to my favorite modern engine, this one was kind of a no-brainer for me. This is my Lionel Legacy Santa Fe SD40T-2. Now, this one is obvious because it's my only Legacy engine, and this is just an amazing engine. For years, I wanted to get a Lionel Legacy engine. I remember looking at the catalogs, looking at all of the great stuff, but they're so expensive, so I never really thought I would get one, at least for a long time. But I was able to save up enough money for one, and I'm so happy to finally have one. It's got tons of great features and detail, full-scale proportions, looks great pulling scale rolling stock, and for that reason, it's definitely my favorite Lionel modern engine. Alright, now that we've talked about my favorite locomotive from each of these eras, it's time to talk about what my favorite Lionel era is overall. Now, picking a favorite Lionel era is really, really difficult. For me, it really depends on the mood I'm in, what I run, and what's my favorite. But the way I look at this question, I think it's like, if I could only collect one era of Lionel for the rest of my life, what would I have to pick? And when faced with that question, I think I'd have to say Lionel Post War. For me, Lionel Post War is kind of the perfect representation of Lionel. It shows Lionel at its height. It's got a ton of variety in products, a great amount of stuff, great quality, and that classic and historic appeal that I really enjoy. So, overall, my favorite engine in my collection is my 736, which you can see back there. And overall, my favorite Lionel era is post-war. But don't get me wrong, I love every single era of Lionel trains, and it really just depends on the mood I'm in. But I will say that if I had to collect just one, I would collect Lionel post-war trains. Alright, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please consider giving it a like or a comment. If you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe to my channel. Thanks.